I hope what I can share is useful and interesting. I'm glad we're not entirely limited to the Gospels, because one of my favorite texts in the whole Bible is in Proverbs, and it says, if you greet your neighbor loudly early in the morning, it will be taken as a curse. So a very practical piece of wisdom about how to actually get on with people. And that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about today. And I know that I talk fast, so I'll try and slow down a little. One of the things, essentially the idea of the Gospels, specifically the words and the actions of Jesus as reported in the Gospels, as a guide to the good life. And a bit more on that in a moment. But first, I guess there is an issue that we possibly need to address, which is some of the words might have been added later in the red words. I'd leave that on the side of my plate for the biblical scholars and the theologians to work on. So I find the words and teaching of Jesus as reported in the Gospels to be the guide to living well. So what do I mean by the good life? Two senses of good. The good life in the sense of enjoyable, fulfilling, worthwhile, valuable, feeling like you are making a contribution to the world and making the world a better place by being in it. So that sense, but also the moral sense of the morally good life, doing good, being good, doing the things that benefit rather than harm others. And that'll definitely be a theme through what I talk about. I will kind of talk through a few different concepts. There's a kind of a through line, but I'm not sure that it's 100% coherent. So forgive me for that. And that's something we can get into in the discussion. And I do hope you will join the discussion. As Peter said, I'll be in the group immediately after the presentation, but I'll continue to be in the group and we can have that conversation. And of course, it's not just about asking me questions and me answering, it's a conversation. So among ourselves and getting to kind of understand what this means to each of us. So delighted to be here at Voice Life Fellowship. I am a member of the group and will continue to be and have been. And anyway, let me stop preambling and start talking about what I understand. So when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, which is what he talks about a lot, there's a lot of the kingdom of heaven is like unto, and so on. I do quite like the KJV, not because I think it's more authoritative or correct, but because I find the language poetic and it's what I grew up with and it's what I memorized. So that's the language that's in my head and that I tend to use. And I'll do a short reading from the Gospels at the end, and it's from the KJV, the King James Version. But when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, he's not really talking about something that happens after we die or after a second coming or sometime off in the future. The kingdom of heaven starts right here, right now, when we make choices that bring the kingdom of heaven into us and us into the kingdom of heaven. So this notion of what is the kingdom of heaven is something that he's defining in his teaching all the time. The kingdom of heaven is like someone who loses a coin and goes seeking it, loses a sheep. There's a whole variety of parables about what the kingdom of heaven is like. And so I'm going to just explore a few elements of what that looks like over time. So, for example, James and John come to Jesus when they're walking along, and they just kind of nudge up and say, hey, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, which of us is going to be higher in the hierarchy? Who's on the top of the org chart? And Jesus pretty much immediately says, no, that's not how it works. The kingdom of heaven isn't hierarchical. If you want to be a leader, you will serve. That's this idea of servant leadership. The greatest among you will be the one who serves the most. So it's the opposite to what we see in the world around us mostly, where people are striving for power, striving for promotion, striving for growth, and so on. That the goal is to serve. Now, serving doesn't preclude promotion. I'm a full professor and a head of school, so I would be kind of hypocritical if I said to serve, I must be at the lowest rung of society and life. But to work within that role in service, to work within that role in ways that I believe make people's lives better. So what I do essentially is work with colleagues who teach teachers, who teach students. So the intention is to make the world better by teaching the students better, through these various people and multipliers of influence, if you like. So it's one of the things that I really do strive to do. And then the interactions with people around us are on the basis of service. How can I make your life better? How can I solve your problem in a way that doesn't create a problem for someone else, and so on. So this idea of servant leadership is really important. I think one of the things that we often miss, because I think conservatism has taken over in many walks of life recently, and it's kind of had a resurgence, which is, I think, is a little sad, but is that Jesus' teachings are not conservative. They are radical. They're extreme. They challenge us to behave in some extreme ways. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those in a moment, but they are extreme ways related to serving others rather than extreme ways relating to dominating and controlling others. So they're a challenge really to love and justice and kindness. When Jesus talks about the weightier matters of the law, he talks about love and justice and kindness and mercy and sacrifice, forgiveness. All of those things are the things in which it's radical teaching. I think I want to use the kind of, I think, clever phrase, the idolatry of the Kardashians, but that's not really fair. But this notion that our values in society more generally have come to be about worshipping the rich and powerful, and worshipping wealth and money in a way that's ultimately kind of centerless, coreless, that doesn't actually lead us to good places. That the fact that we've got the billionaires fighting to have the space race at the moment, whether that actually, while the workers who work for those particular billionaires are having to, if you pardon the indelicacy, pee in bottles because they don't get toilet breaks at work. We get these huge inequalities in society when we count only what we can count, when we value only what has a dollar value. So I think the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels essentially are an antidote to that. They're an antidote to many of the ills of modern life. They're an antidote to our environmental destruction, which comes from the same thing, this idea of everything has value only as it has dollar value. So another species going extinct is justifiable if there's a dollar value to be extracted and so on. So I think there is a real antidote to that, and I'll talk a bit more about that soon as well. He did talk a lot about the kingdom, and the parables were about the lost sheep. The 100 sheep are safe in the fold. The one sheep is out there in the wilderness, and the shepherd goes and finds the one sheep. Now, to some extent, that's about Jesus finding us, but that also is about us finding other people, us finding the vulnerable person, the lost person, the person who is not part of the group, who is excluded. And I think I would kind of connect to that and say that his ministry is a ministry of radical inclusion. It's not about exclusion. It's not about who's in the club and who's out of the club. The wording is go out to the highways and byways and compel them to come in. Now that might sound a bit like force them to come in, but I don't think that's the kind of compulsion we talk about. We talk about someone being compelling if we find it attractive. So how do you attract people into fellowship? Whatever fellowship means, whether that's this Voice Life Fellowship or another community of like-minded friends or a whole variety of other things. How do we include rather than exclude? How do we define in rather than define out? I think it's a real challenge to us to be able to think about how do we include everyone in the connection without exception. And where our exceptions lie is the challenging bit, isn't it? Because the in-group and the out-group. I did just have a bit of a go at Mr. Bezos and Mr. Musk. And it did just have a go at the many K-named Kardashians. So including those people as fully human, while perhaps deploring some of their activities and actions, I think is important as well. Recognizing the full humanity of everyone means things like opposing the death penalty, for me at least, because although people have done despicable things, they remain human people. It means that when I see an anti-vaxxer die of COVID, there's no schadenfreude, there's no joy in that, because that person made a poor choice, probably misled by someone else who I would judge more harshly than that person. But in the end, it's a life lost. One of my favorite non-gospel things is John Donne's poem, For Who the Bell Tolls. And he says, you know, any human's death diminishes me because we're all human together. Do look up that poem. It's from the 1600s. It's incredibly powerful. And it's available freely around the web in a variety of places. We tend to have favorite bits of the Gospels as well. And I certainly do have a couple of favorite chapters that I'll talk about in a moment. And of course, you know, the first three Gospels are the synoptic Gospels that tell essentially the same story in different ways, or from slightly different perspectives, and emphasize slightly different elements. And then John's Gospel has a different approach and tells the story in slightly different ways again. There are these various emphases that come through, and I think those are valuable to think about. But a couple of my favorite chapters, one is Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And essentially, the difference between the sheep and the goats, essentially those who are in fellowship and those who are outside of fellowship, is not what they say, not what they assent, not where they go on a Saturday or Sunday or a Friday, or what they do. The difference between the sheep and the goats is how they treat the most vulnerable. The KJV wording is, the least of these, my brethren. How do they feed the hungry, heal the sick, visit the prisoners, clothe the naked, etc., or do they not? And I think that particular thing, again, needs to be fully inclusive of all humanity, with an emphasis on the most vulnerable. Recognizing that there's, to cite another non-gospel thing, My Fair Lady, the musical, and the idea of the deserving poor, that there are certain poor who do deserve care, and certain people who are in poverty who don't deserve our care. Matthew 25 says, visit the prisoners. It doesn't say visit the innocent prisoners. It says visit all the prisoners. So we get to judge whether these are the appropriate, the deserving, the right people for our concern. They are people, and therefore they deserve our concern. So on this then influences my life and my perspective in a whole variety of ways. Like, for example, how I vote around climate. Climate change, for example, is going to unevenly impact the world. I'm a middle-aged, relatively comfortably off white guy in a developed country. Yes, it will be bad. I probably shouldn't buy extreme beachfront property, but it's not going to be that bad for me, and it's probably not even going to be that bad for my kids in the next generation, unless we really, really go bad. But for the people in Bangladesh, where the typhoons will be vastly more extreme and what they already don't have, the people in Africa, where the droughts will become worse and fresh water will be impossible to gain, the people in China and India, the two biggest population centers of the world, when the glaciers in the Himalayas all melt and there's no year-round water supply in those countries. The most vulnerable people on earth will be the people who are most harmed. And therefore, I feel that I need to vote, be an activist about climate change, not for scientific reasons, not to protect my beachfront property that I don't have, but because it protects the most vulnerable. So, and that's just one illustration, I guess, of the ways in which a particular approach to understanding humanity and our relationship with humanism, and I'll talk about humanism in a second, really has implications for how we vote at the ballot box and how we think, how we purchase, and all of that kind of stuff. So Peter mentioned that I kind of identify as secular humanist. What that means to me is that secular essentially, my university, Notre Dame University, is a Catholic university, but it says we cater to people of all faiths and none. And that's pretty much it. Secular essentially means to me that religion should be tolerated, free, accepted, but not making the rules in government. That government ought to be for all human beings, not for particular protected groups. And then humanism for me means what I've just been talking about. Every human is fully human, and we acknowledge the humanity of others. We consider people to be good and savable and positive and to have virtues and benefits, and try to draw that out of people rather than to condemn, attack, challenge, and so on. So to me, that's what those labels mean. They may be different for other people and they may have other implications, but that's what it means to me. So I guess one last thing that I'll wrap up, and then I will read a couple of verses that I think are really cool, is the idea of building bigger tables, not bigger barns. There is definitely a parable. The rich man tears down his barns and builds bigger ones, and God comes to him and says, "You idiot, tonight you're going to die. You can't take it with you." And none of us can take it with us. So as our own wealth and comfort level increases, figuring out ways to pass that on, to share that, to make that more equal rather than less equal, is something that, because I guess part of the point that I would make is that all of us here are probably in the top 10 to 15% of wealth in the world. We don't feel wealthy because there are the billionaires around, but relative to the average wealth of every human on earth, we are pretty comfortable. So figuring out ways to actually share that, spread that, connect to others in their full humanity. Oh, sorry, and one other thing, I did say it wouldn't be fully coherent and connected. That has implications for our relationship with the rest of the natural world as well. That concern for humans means concern for the natural world because we're so tied in with the world around us. The environment is crucial. If we kill off all the bees with pesticides, then the flowers won't get fertilized and we won't get any food. So we are very, very connected to the natural world. The cane toad problem in Queensland and increasingly across Australia is an example of how we try to mess with it and we don't understand what we're doing, so we make it worse. So this understanding of what it means to be human implies a respect for the natural world, a desire to improve and protect and connect with the natural world. So, all right, let me take a little bit from one of my other favorite chapters, Matthew 5. And I think when we go to Matthew 5, we tend to go to the Beatitudes, blessed are the, which is great. And I think there's a whole other talk about what blessed are the poor in spirit means and what it implies in terms of these things. But I'm going to this latter half of the chapter. And there's quite a few things where Jesus does this kind of parallelism structure and says, you've heard that it was said in the olden days this, but I say to you this. And it comes back to the point I made earlier. His teachings are radical and extreme, and they're difficult. I think that's one of the other things that we have as a misconception is that following Jesus means being so meek and mild that we're not challenged. Well, no, we challenge ourselves. We turn the judgment lens on ourselves and try to do better rather than turning the judgment lens outward on others. So, right, from verse 21, but I'm skipping a few as I go through to try and get the concepts. You've heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, or you idiot, shall be in danger of the council, but whoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hellfire. I don't know how you go when you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic, but that's a high standard. It's a challenging one. You've heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman or a man or that person of your preference to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So it's beyond don't commit adultery. It is keep your mind clear, but we kind of get this purity culture, Puritan weirdness. What it should be, I think, the next step is keep your desire for your partner. That it's that positive thing that if you have a partner, then keep your desire in that direction rather than in every other direction around the world. It's this positive thing of sexual desire is incredibly powerful. We know it is. So how do we use it in the way it creates the best and most positive life? And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about the other possible, my situation is very simple. I'm cis het. I'm a straight guy who has been married to the same person for nearly 35 years. I understand that my life, my way of being, my way of thinking is not for everybody. So I'm very happy for other people to find what this means for them in their context. And you've heard it that it had been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this, again, is just radical. It's really difficult. But I say to you, resist not evil, but whoever smites thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And we kind of talked about turn the other cheek. But, if someone punches you, to not punch back, to in fact say, go again, is radical. If anyone sues you and takes your coat, let him have your shirt as well. If everyone forces you to go a mile, go the second mile. Give to the one that asks, and from the ones that borrows from you, don't turn away. So I'll wrap up there. But I think these are challenges not to control others, but to build our own lives, coming right round back to where I started, into the good life. The life that's good, that's enjoyable and positive and pleasant, and the life that's morally good and makes the world a better place because we're here. Thanks very much, Pete, and everyone.